Each department has its own assessment for learning policy, and these policies vary hugely in quality and effectiveness. That means that whichever department is there, whether it is an educational department or it is just an organization, an industry, all need to have an assessment for learning policy. For example, if there is a factory where garments are being produced and the workers are working in that factory, the owner of the factory or the assessor would also have an assessment for learning policy there to find out which are the workers who are learning to produce those garments, and they are learning all the skills that are required to produce those garments. But in every organization, the time period or the time span in which this learning has to take place is different. Also, the quality of assessment for learning could be different. There is no harm if the organizations are having different assessment for learning policies in different organizations. But for education, it has to be the similar kind of rules and regulations for this type of a policy, so that all over the country, the assessment for learning goes in a uniform manner. That would, of course, be an ideal situation where the whole country is following up the same methods to assess for learning. But at least we can try to have something close to one another. At least the quality of this policy should be uniform, and it should be based on the principles on which the student learning is going to make improvement and become better. Furthermore, very few of these policies make a distinction between the different techniques and purposes of assessment which relate to different ages and abilities of students. So these policies need to be different for different ages and abilities of students, because the skills at different levels and different ages will be different from one another, and assessment for learning can be based on these principles of having different abilities. For example, if there is a class where the abilities are quite refined, it is possible that the assessment for learning in that particular class must be kept at a higher standard, because already the students are learning, and therefore the criteria for that particular class has to be at a higher level than a class where the abilities are quite slow. The students learn slower than the students who are learning in the higher level. Therefore, the policy has to be different in that case. That is, that the marking criteria has to be according to the learning abilities of the students. Also, we have noticed that in the primary school, the verbal education and instructions, they work more than the written one. So the ability and the learning to be assessed should be based more on oral exercises than written ones, because it is possible that at younger ages the children, they write slower than they learn whatever they can orally. So the assessment for learning of writing at younger age or at the level of primary school might not be something which would be giving a direction to the improvement of writing. Rather, it may become a pressure for the children to improve in writing at that very early age. It is better to assess their learning by verbal exercises, by oral exercises, so that that would be quite feasible and practical to assess them for their learning in primary school.